So
All right,
Jay,
welcome
are
back.
you?
Go ahead.
Sorry. No,
No,
I
go
was
ahead.
going to ask. Well, we
After
get
out of the
before
way.
Jay. We'll get Jay. So you're aren't you cold in a short sleeve shirt standing outside?
Well, I'm tough. I'm tough there like that. Brett, not like you
Okay.
Chicagoans. It's because of all the chili we eat up here, right, Pat?
Oh God.
Fortifies us. We got strong blood. Thanks.
Strong
Natural
blood
heat.
because you pour so much cinnamon and spaghetti on your chili.
Natural heat. So anyway, Pat, why don't you open us up
All right.
here?
Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the pre-whiskey chili talk, sponsored by New Riff Distilling and the Party Source. This is another Whiskey Wednesday with Binnies. I'm Pat, along with Joe and Brett from the Whiskey Hotline. Jay Erisman, our buddy from New Riff, is back. Jay, co-founder of the distillery, standing in front of the distillery. If you got any questions today, just please use the Q&A function at the bottom. We'll get them answered for you. And we're going to talk about a couple new things New Riff has to offer. Chances are, we are big fans of the distillery. We think they're doing some pretty cool things. So Jay, what do you want to talk about tonight, man?
Well, gosh, I don't know. Good to see you guys. Wish we could get up there in person. Maybe this time next year. Who knows? Yeah, we are trucking along at New Riff. It's been a very challenging year. We have risen to the occasion, et cetera, made some hand sanitizer back in the spring. You need any hand sanitizer? I got some hand sanitizer.
Made a lot of hand sanitizer.
Well, have you guys run, because I know that FDA, right? Didn't the FDA just made some changes in terms of the hazmat rating for shipping that? Has that become a problem trying to get out of the last bit you have around?
We weren't really shipping it, and we could figure out how to do that, but we were just mostly selling it around here. We continue to donate it to first responders and hospitals and people like that. But we sell it in gallons of it in the gift shop and stuff too. It is the best damn hand jam in the land.
Hand jam. I like that. I haven't heard that one.
We made hand sanitizer, which for what it's worth was a technical feat because we had never done anything like that before. How do we make something 180 proof and we don't have a vodka still? So we got the column still dialed up, and then we redistilled it in the pot still with all of the plates activated. Pot distilled hand sanitizer.
Pot distilled,
triple
pot distilled
distilled
hand sanitizer.
Hand sanitizer. It's Irish pure pot still sanitizer. It's like Rosebank of hand sanitizer.
Did you use any heirloom grains in the hand sanitizer?
We used 100% non-GMO corn. Anyway, so there was that, and then we had a few more maybe specialty things come out this year. Of course, we're trucking along with our flagship bottled and bond bourbon and bottled and bond rye. That proceeds apace. Single barrels remain white hot, except we don't have quite as many in-person picks, and none now at the moment. And then this year, we just so happened to have a little bit bigger clutch of certain of our specialty things. We talked on our last call about backsetters. And that was, semi a surprise to us. We didn't forget about them, but they did sneak up on us, and we realized, oh, we really might have a chance to sell these things. And then we also had some other things that we made. I got bottles here in front of me, and you do, that came to fruition as well. New projects. And then we also had a repeat of what is an ongoing whiskey, which is our, can you see the bottle, Balboa Rye. Yeah. We make some of this every year. In the early days, we only made a batch now and then. And in later years, we made up to a silo at a time. So a full truckload, 50,000 pounds at a time, went into various New Riff recipes. So Balboa is not going anywhere but up. We still don't have it frequently or a lot of it, and it'll never be a regular item. But we had enough now that we could spread some around to people like our friends in Chicago. So shall we?
Well, we were extremely pleased and grateful for the generosity. It wasn't when Molly kind of sprung that on us a little bit. It's like, hey, I don't know if you're interested at all, but and we're like, yes, and yesterday.
Cool. So when did you guys get it?
About a month ago.
Yeah. Okay.
Did we go through, or maybe even after that? Yeah, it's getting close to a month now because we staggered. We did our last two big drops for the year, and the Maltster and Balboa came on the first one, and then
Right.
a bit of winter is coming.
We'll come
today.
on the next one, right?
Is
Yeah.
actually, yeah.
Well, do you guys want to get into this Maltster wheat?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's try that. So I have a bottle in front of me. It is called Maltster, and a thing that we made years ago, not intending, we'll call it Maltster, you know. Who knows 4 years from now what we will market, what we'll call some of the things we make today. It's almost wise not to go into it. We didn't even go into making the bourbon knowing that it would be bottled and bond. We held that out as a possibility, and it evolved to a point where how can it not be bottled and bond? So indeed, just to be clear, like everything else New Riff makes, Maltsters are bottled and bond without chill filtration. And I say Maltsters, there were two of them. I'm sorry we couldn't send you any of the other. We just didn't have enough. We had more of this one, but the other one was a malted rye. Both of these represent and exploit the ability of our distillery to work any grain into the system. We have an auxiliary dump chute along with the primary silos that we work with. We have silos of corn and rye and malted barley, but with this auxiliary chute, we have the ability to put any bag of grain into the system. That could be a 50-pound bag, or it could be a 2,000-pound bag. And we exploit that to great effect all over the place. That's how we make our 100% malted rye whiskey that will be out someday. And so with Maltster, it was our first wheated bourbon. Now we set ourselves on a path of being a rye house, a rye-centric distillery from the early days. We knew we would do that. But why not make wheated bourbon? Of course we would make wheated bourbon. We love wheated bourbon. And so we did our new riff, if you will, on an old tradition. Oh, sorry, that's a lab sample. It says on the back of every bottle, a new riff. There we go, on an old tradition. So this is our riff on a wheated bourbon, and the grain bill is on the back. If I could read it off to you, it's 65% corn, so it's a bourbon. 18% Bohemian floor malted wheat, 10% unmalted wheat, and 7% dark wheat. And dark wheat is a roasted, it's not as dark as a chocolate malt. It's, I would say, very heavily toasted, but it wouldn't really get into being roasted. Probably something like about a 60 or an 80 Lovibond, very dark toasted wheat. But it's not as heavy as that. So dark wheat goes in there. This approximates a little bit our head distillers, one of our head distillers' favorite styles of beer, and one of my favorite styles of beer. He's a professional brewer. He was Brian Sprance, our head distiller, came up with this. We agreed we wanted to make a wheat, and he put his brewing smarts together to come up with this grain bill. And it mimics a little bit one of our favorite beer styles. And speaking as an old home brewer, one of my favorite beer styles, a Bavarian wheat beer, a Weizen, and specifically a Dunkelweizen, because it's got that little bit of dark wheat in there. Mm-hmm. So it's aping a little bit how a brewer approaches a wheated bourbon, not necessarily how a whiskey maker approaches wheated bourbon. This is not wheated bourbon like they make at points to the south of us. This is a new riff. So it's a little bit older also. On the back of the bottle, let me hold it up here. You can see it. We're very proud of this. It says, aged at least 5 years. Our first 5-year-old whiskeys.
Nice.
Pretty cool. And this one, honestly, coming off the still, I mean, we're accustomed to this high rye bourbon, 30% rye bourbon. We make 95% rye whiskey. We make malted rye. We're accustomed to big, bold, spicy white dog. I mean, the stuff off the still has got a ton of flavor. And so when this stuff came off, honestly, we were a little underwhelmed. It wasn't bad. Didn't have any off notes or sharpness or anything like that. It was clinically just fine. Compared to what we were used to, it was pretty light and easy going. It needed a little more time in the barrel. It was good at 4 years, but we wanted to take it to 5. And here the end result is drinking really well. As I do with almost all my whiskeys, especially when they are unchill filtered, I trinkle a little bit of water in there. And I enjoy seeing the oils swim around, that smoothness you can see. So the quality of wheat that went into this is extraordinary. That floor malted Bohemian wheat, maybe the finest wheat in the brewing world. American style malted wheat is not quite so characterful. Obviously, floor malting a grain anymore is very labor intensive. This is the Bavarian equivalent to something like floor malted Maris Otter barley that you would get in the UK that you might put in a great barley wine. So this is the lead malt in this is of extraordinary quality.
And then, Jay, did you on these? So, and your grain bills are your grains are sourced from whomever can provide you with quality grains. Where did you get that floor malted Bohemian wheat? Where did you get that from?
Right. We have a long-standing relationship with Brewer Supply Group is their name. Brian Sprance knew them well from the brewing industry, and they supply us with distiller's malt, which is a malt designed to help convert whiskey, and that's what goes in our silo. So we use distiller's malt there, but we wanted our relationship with a maltster. First of all, we're never about price. We're never about give me the cheapest malt and that's what I'm going to buy.
Right.
That's not it at all. We also don't want to have to deal necessarily with too many places. We get one malt from over there, one malt from over here, and that one over there. It's nice to be vertically aligned with one great producer. And we like a brewer's supply over just a straight distiller's supply, because those folks are also really good at making those other kinds of grains. So we get distiller's malt from them, and very many of our specialty malts come from them as well. Our malted rye comes through them from Germany. We actually direct import it. So we get that. But anytime we are doing something special with malts like this, or indeed the winter whiskey, those kind of things have stuff from Brewer Supply Group. So that's where we get these. These are our primo quality beer brewing malts that get into this. How do you like the entry on that Maltster?
Yeah.
It's just so supple.
Yeah,
it's interesting to me too, because one of the things, there's a lot of because of certain very, very highly sought after trophy whiskeys that we're knee deep in the season of trying to sell. You remember those good old days.
I do, and I look back fondly.
As long as you're looking back,
one of the best parts of my new job is I can't help you with.
Right. So
sorry.
So having some discussion about why the fascination with those products in particular, but then trying to dig in with our customers a little bit and say, okay, listen, we don't have it to sell to you, but here's some other wheated bourbons, and through some work that I've been able to do with Moonshine U and our friends there. There's some argument that can be made in a lot of cases that wheat's job is basically to maybe give a little bit of mouthfeel and texture, and otherwise stay the hell out of the way of the corn. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the first wheated whiskeys where you're, instead of having that as your trope, sort of, you're taking what normally should just stay out of the way, right? Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden you're manipulating it and actually teaching it to actually have some flavor and character, which is what interested me the most about this. Once I get, it's like, okay, fine, they did a wheated, of course, because everybody, and then I was like, oh wait, this isn't just a wheated bourbon. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, and especially the dark wheat, the processing of the dark wheat, and using the malt. Right. Mm-hmm. Because in a good beer, there is absolutely, think about all the characters you get out of Hefeweizen, right? Mm-hmm. The things, that nuttiness, you get that nuttiness, you get some I will get a little bit of coriander, a little bit of cloves, and a little bit of baking spice, a little bit of grain, a little bit of what people would think of as almost like a rye bread character sometimes. Right.
I should point out that this is not made with Hefeweizen yeast. We used our standard whiskey yeast on this. We haven't made anything with different yeasts yet at New Riff. Talking with Brian earlier this year, we agreed that might be the next sort of Rubicon to cross, and maybe we'll fool around with that. In the early days, we would have been, and still are, very mindful of not mucking up the microbiological flora, microflora in the distillery by introducing some other yeast. Not that it would run away and suddenly everything would taste like Hefeweizen, but let's just be real careful about that. So this is not Hefeweizen yeast, although that does fascinate me. And I know it
would be kind of,
I'm sure.
Wonder what that would be like.
The first thing that struck me with this was how notably different it was than every other New Riff whiskey I've had. And, you mentioned it earlier, kind of the rye house. and everything New Riff. I mean, it's always been, it's had that big full body, you know, no part obvious, thanks, you know, no doubt to non-chill filtration, 100 proof bottling, all that. And this has that supple, rich mouthfeel, but it's so much more fruitier and just overall softer and a little more caramelized, I think, that I normally get, you know, that big punch of rye in pretty much everything you guys make. And this was, I was like, holy cow. Like if I was tasting this blind, I wouldn't have pegged it as a New Riff, you know?
Right.
But it's, I love it. I think it's wonderful. I think it's one of the best things I've tasted this year, personally.
I like how it shows off the mouthfeel that we get. Our whiskeys are all big and broad. There's no thin whiskey at New Riff. It begins with the water. That water, that well water we have, the aquifer water with 4 times the dissolved minerality of the typical tap water in the Ohio Valley. That water is so huge. You take a glass of that, it's like, man, this is a watery water. It's got a big body. I'm sure that's the beginning of New Riff's broad mouthfeel. And I love that here in other people's hands can be very nice, but lighter whiskeys, much lighter sometimes, wheated bourbon. Not here. It's still the New Riff signature, big and fat, broad whiskey.
Yeah, totally. What an awesome whiskey.
Great, long.
Thank you.
Too.
Yeah.
Good chocolatey.
Hopefully you guys watching and tasting with us got a chance to pick this up, because it's an awesome.
And if you didn't, this is one reason that maybe we'll stop trashing weeders.
Sure.
Maybe,
Yeah. Maybe.
Not till January.
right? So
Was the fermentation different with anything with wheat? I mean, do you have to do anything? We're staring at that lovely vat of corn and rye behind Brett. Is there anything you had to do different after grain crushing with this? Or is it kind of like you use that specialty grain chute and then it's business as usual?
It was pretty much business as usual in fermentation. These whiskeys like this, and the same is true of the last whiskey we'll taste tonight, probably the last would be the winter whiskey. Running different grains through there can be, especially like a raw grain. There's a little bit of raw wheat in here, and that can be problematic. The last whiskey, we'll talk. Let me get back to that question when we talk about winter whiskey.
Okay.
But no, this was relatively straightforward.
Cool.
Fermentation 4 days, like most of our bourbons.
Cool. Well, which one you want to talk about, Balboa Rye next, or?
Sure. Let's finish with the winter. It's such a different flavor, and put the Balboa in the middle. I have just a little bit of a bottle here, a little bit left in this one, and that is Balboa Rye. And I'm very pleased to talk to you guys about it. Glad we could send you some.
Mm-hmm.
I can't promise we always will, but I do promise it's going up in production. And we made more this year, and we're going to make even more next year. So we like this. So the story on this Balboa, I've had an interest in farming and agriculture, agronomy, historically speaking also, and have always wanted New Riff to bear in mind that distilling is fundamentally an agricultural exercise. It always was. Everything in your liquor store that you ever sold came from a plant, didn't it?
Yeah.
All of it, right? All of it. When you think of it that way, it's, well, oh yeah, damn, it did. Agave and grapes and wheat and potatoes, everything.
Well, they make that fermented milk in a couple different parts of the world. I don't know that you'd want to.
We've got it. We actually have
it. They do. They have milk vodka. Yeah, that's the only thing.
Bertha's Revenge. We have it on the shelf.
So I stand corrected. All but
all but two things.
Two things.
And the Irish are so weird anyway. So
yeah,
like we're knocking on my people.
So we're not farmers. I really admire those farmer distilleries who grow their own grains and distill it all themselves. Knock yourselves out. We could not possibly have become farmers as well as learning how to run this place behind me. But furthermore, we don't have the land for that. We have the land for this and so on. But we wanted to be very close to a farmer, and hence it was never about finding the cheapest corn. It was never even about, well, if we're going to be a Kentucky bourbon distiller, we got to use a Kentucky farmer. Our farmer is a fellow up in Greensburg, Indiana, about an hour away. And I don't know if that's local or not, but I got his number from Larry Ebersol, our consultant and the wizard of the old Seagram's distillery, our consulting master distiller. When I asked him, you got any advice on corn? Where should I go for a farmer? And he said, you should call Jim Rutledge and ask him who they use, because I don't know who that guy is, but he's really good. So I called up Jim, and Jim's like, write down this number. I'm writing down the number. Jim, what's his name? And his name's Charles Fogg, and we think he's the best corn farmer in the business. Charles was trained, and if you know farmers, you can understand how staggeringly rare this is. But he was trained by whiskey chemists, and not just any whiskey chemists, but Seagram's whiskey chemists. Okay, he was trained by Seagram's quality control people how to do whiskey analysis of how to do analysis of corn for whiskey production, not just for pet food, which is his other line of work, not just for grain or for converting it into alcohol. Nobody cares about that. How do you grow and work with corn for whiskey? And he runs in his farm. Again, this just blows my mind that a farmer can do this. Runs a lab in his office where they measure things like moisture, which is common, but also foreign matter. And they run a genetics test. Every batch of corn comes with a little strip promising us of its non-GMO status. He does all this work on it. He's got, I don't know, spectrometry or something. He's really on top of it. So we thought, well, that's our farmer. So we started getting corn from him. And I think in August or September of 2014, we'd only been running a couple months. And Charles dropped off some corn, and he said to me, hey, by the way, I grow some rye too. I about fell down and got up back into my chair. You grow rye too? What are you doing with this rye? Turns out he had been growing a rye just as a cover crop for years, like 15, 20 years. His family was growing this rye. And he said, well, it's called Balboa. And so Balboa Rye is an heirloom rye. Heirloom corns are hard to get, but they're out there. Probably a couple dozen distillers in the country are working with heirloom corn. Some of them grow it themselves. Corns are hard enough to find, but heirloom rye is rare as hen's teeth. It's almost impossible to find heirloom rye. There's about one somewhat available heirloom rye. It's called Abruzzi, and that's just about it. Just about gone. So Balboa, I've never heard of it before. So we get this Balboa and distill it, and it tasted fantastic. I wouldn't say it was better than our normal rye, but it's absolutely different than the normal rye. It's fruitier. The pitch. Sometimes I use musical terms because I'm a musician. I'm a guitar player, and sometimes I like to describe these things in musical terms. Imagine if you had a graphic equalizer or a mixing board, and the flavors of the whiskey are all in the mixing board, and the mixing board or the equalizers push this way and that way for one whiskey, and this one pushes it this way and that way and that way. It's a different mix of tones of how to make a rye whiskey. And so we got this stuff in, and for years actually we called it Fogg Rye. We just called it after the farmer we got it from, Fogg Rye. And we tell a little bit of his story on the back of the bottle. It talks about on the label how farmer Charles Fogg grows this expressly for New Riff. We're the only people who get it, and the only people I'm quite sure who are working with it today. And so we've made batches of it. In the early days, we made a batch once in a while. In later years, we made as much as a silo at a time, so 50,000 pounds at a go. And we've distilled more than that this year. And we're going to distill even more than that next year, I think. So Balboa is a...
Well, aren't you kind of tied into the amount of acreage and the season, right? I mean,
a little bit, yes.
You're kind of tied in. It's like,
yes.
How much room does he have to plant it?
We could not do something like, and I'm not sure we'd want to, all of our rye is Balboa. It's very special, but we want to continue with the standard rye that we get. And that's an awful lot of rye to grow. In fact, interesting tidbit about New Riff. So we make mostly bourbon and we make a lot of rye. We actually use on an annual basis about 20% more rye grain than we do corn, which is staggering. I'm pretty sure no distillery in Kentucky maybe ever did such a thing, because 30% of our bourbon is rye, 95% of our rye is rye. We wind up using a bit more rye than corn. It just blows my mind. And here, to think that all those old time distillers, they hated making rye. Make it as little as they can. It gums up the stills. It's the hardest whiskey to make. It foams in the fermenter. They hated making rye. And here we're using more rye than corn. So fun fact about New Riff.
So this Balboa, did it behave any differently production wise? I mean, I assume you're getting a slightly different yield versus your standard rye you're buying and making the regular rye whiskey with.
Yes, it is a little bit smaller yield, although rye is already a smaller yield than corn. It behaved otherwise pretty much the same in the process. The yield is a lot more expensive too, because the yield per acre is considerably down from modern ryes. Or what is essentially a commodity rye. Our primary rye supplier is Brooks Grain, and they are the #1 rye supplier to almost all the bourbon industry. What we get from Brooks for our standard New Riff rye, have a bottle down here. For this rye is a very special spec of corn from Brooks, and it's actually identical to the rye that Larry Ebersold created the 95% rye recipe with in the 1990s. The mid 1990s was when, maybe 93, 94, he came up with that recipe. And part of the genius and part of the secret to making that is to get the right spec of rye. You've got to get the incoming rye has got to be just right. It has to be cleaned, and has to, the correct, they prefer certain regions. And so imagine a gigantic pile of rye that is feeding the 95% rye recipe in Indiana. We use from that identical pile of grain. So we wouldn't want to get away from that, but we would like to make more and more Balboa. Don't you agree?
Mm-hmm.
This stuff is just gorgeous. There's a florality to it. The fruits are more forward. These heirloom grains. This is not so much true of rye, but it's true of corn, and it's especially true of wheat. The reason we like heirloom heirloom tomatoes, heirloom breeds of pork, heirloom corn, is that it's got more flavor than modern types of rye, of grains, of non-heirloom, if you will, modern hybridized grains. Rye has not been so affected by that because it's not the commodity crop that wheat is, or corn. But modern corn, and especially modern wheat, have had a lot of the flavor bred out of them. Wheat especially suffered more than any of them. So heirloom rye doesn't necessarily taste better than heirloom or than modern rye, but it does definitely taste different. And it's harder to get, very hard to find, and costs a lot more because the farmer gets fewer tons or fewer bushels per acre. So we have to go in prepared to pay more for that.
And is this one slightly over 4 years as well?
The Balboa is 4 years old. Yeah.
4 years old.
Yeah.
Cool.
Its aging curve and maturation curve are pretty similar to our standard rye. It is tasty a little bit earlier than the bourbon. It certainly didn't need more time in the barrel than our standard rye.
The chewy rye, really just layered and thick and full of wonderful herbal rye flows, but that florality, you're right, really showed up on the palate as well.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, you guys carry on. BRB.
Okay. We're going to talk about winter whiskey while you're gone, Brett.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really,
Lovely
really
stuff.
nice place on there.
Yeah, it's the regular New Riff rye by no means lean, but this doesn't have the edge to it, I would say, that the standard one does. I mean, it's still very obviously a rye, but it's just it's not as sharp, I think, as the standard one.
Kind of fattened up version.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like Kentucky Rittenhouse versus like Pennsylvania Rittenhouse.
That Pennsylvania Rittenhouse, pretty ridiculously good.
Yeah. Old stuff.
So that's Balboa.
Yeah, that's Balboa. So what can you tell us about winter whiskey? Because this is, you're talking, you kind of are brewers turned distillers, and I think this kind of speaks to that more than anything else I've had from you guys so far.
Right. So that tangent of our history, or our narrative, if you will, is a powerful one. It's not the only one. It's not as if we said, we're going to make bourbon as if we were brewers. We opened New Riff simply to make great whiskey. And we bring to that a lot of talents and voices and backgrounds, and brewing is certainly one of them. I'm an old home brewer. Our head distiller is a brilliant ex-brewer. He was, more or less a master level brewer for Samuel Adams. Brian, in his time at Boston Beer, pulled off some technically very, very difficult products. And so we that comes to him naturally, and it's certainly a part of our narrative. It's not all that New Riff is. One could open a brewery and a distillery. In fact, I see craft distillers doing this someday, and they say, well, we wanted to make a great whiskey, so we knew we had to start with a great beer, so we chose a Pilsner. Not what we are about. If you see the fermentation there from in Brett's picture there, that's how we ferment. This is a whiskey fermentation. When we brew, we are brewing whiskey. We do not want to brew a beer. A beer that is good for drinking out of hand on a hot summer day, in my humble opinion, is not a beer suitable for making whiskey. The set of flavors and where those flavors come from are totally different. To me, they do not live in the same world. So we didn't want to be, people who come to bourbon, but we're going to make it like as if it was beer. This time we'll make this kind of beer bourbon, and next we'll make that kind of beer rye, and we weren't necessarily going to do that until we did. So here's what happened. Must have been the fall of 15. And Brian and I are if this is a new riff on an old tradition, then he and I are like the songwriting team a little bit. I'm not sure which one is Jagger and which one is Richards, but we bounce ideas off each other, and one of us will take something and run with it, or someone else will bring something to the table, and that's where we go, whatever it is. So on this day is a good example of the interplay of that. I had suggested to Brian, so all these grains, what about oats? We could put oats in a bourbon, right? It's not illegal. They make wheated bourbon, right? What if we put oats? Couldn't we make an oated bourbon? What do you think? And being ex-brewer that he is, what came out of his mouth, and just like bubbled up out of him, he's like, oatmeal stout. And the next thing he said was, chocolate oatmeal stout. Next thing I know, we're making chocolate oatmeal stout bourbon. And it was Brian's mash bill that is still a bourbon, but it emulates how you might go about making a chocolate oatmeal stout. And here's the bottle, winter whiskey.
Nice.
Yeah, nice stuff. Once again, bottled in bond without chill filtration. And I'll get back to the name and everything later, but the grain bill is on the back right there. I hope you can read it out. Let me read it off to you. It is 65% corn, 20% malted oats. You know how hard it is to find malted oats? They're not easy.
Yeah.
7% pale ale malt, 5% steel cut raw oats, and 3% chocolate malt. So to break those down, by the way, malted oats are oats that have been malted. Pale ale malt is a 2-row malted barley, as you would go in as would build the base of an oatmeal stout.
Yeah, the base malt. Yeah.
Right, that's the base malt. And then we put in a little bit of raw oats, and the chocolate malt is what takes it into that stout direction. So you get the dark roasted flavor, the dark color, etc. Put this through the still, and it was chocolate oatmeal stout bourbon. And it's probably still the hardest thing we make. Oats and beer stills. You can see our beer still right there in the picture. Oats do not like to go through a beer still, and beer stills do not like to have oats run through them. It's very hard to make. We have to clean the still before and after that run. So we can do it, but boy, it's tough. We have made it though every year since then, and it is also going to be going forward an annual item. It won't be something, I think it's always going to be winter whiskey, actually. So about the name, here we for years we called it, and we gave taste to people. I can't remember if you guys got a taste when
we tasted it the last time we were there,
yeah.
A year ago or something.
Yeah. So we always called it chocolate oatmeal stout bourbon. And it was fun to say, look at the crazy things we made. We made Balboa Rye. We made wheated bourbon. We made chocolate oatmeal stout bourbon, as if it's the craziest thing, you ever heard. And it was a little crazy. But at the end of the day, when we considered really bringing this to market, we were a little afraid that first of all, these are bourbon consumers. They're not necessarily beer drinkers. They're not necessarily adventurous, well-versed, knowing all the styles of beer drinkers. They might not know what chocolate oatmeal stout is. And some percentage of them might see, oh, chocolate. Oh, great. New Riff is now chocolate whiskey.
Flavored whiskey.
I'm done. I'm out. You know, does it become flavored whiskey? We don't want that at all. So, and explaining all of that is difficult. So we do explain it on the back where we tell the story of this, but we wanted to come up with a different name. Oated bourbon, it doesn't roll off the tongue. It doesn't even sound as good as wheated bourbon. So we shot that down and wanted to come up with something. And I think Ken Lewis's idea was, you know, what about a winter product? What about a holiday offering? He's an old retailer. Don't you love all the special holiday offerings you get in?
Yeah, just a holiday offering, New Riff holiday offering.
Yeah.
Could have been
So
that.
we wanted to, and we came up with winter whiskey. And then we thought, you know what, this kind of tastes like a winter whiskey. Stouts and oatmeal stouts and big heavy beers. Maybe you didn't drink them in the summer for one thing. There is a seasonality to the beer world that there is not in the whiskey world. And we liked participating in that and participating in it, not just with, we'll make a winter package. Let's see, this year, let's put in a shot glass. That's BS. Now that's boring. That's easy. What can we do that is, again, a new riff on an old tradition? And so we thought to call it winter whiskey because even the flavors are kind of wintry, kind of Christmassy, kind of holiday themed. It's along the same track as a big winter ale or something like that. So to taste this stuff, and I'm sorry you guys don't have any yet, but it'll get there. We spread some around our distribution network.
I got more of my rye.
Yeah.
It's, you know, despite the presence of things like chocolate malt and the name and stuff like that, it actually is not particularly sweet. It tends to dryness.
Mm-hmm.
It really helps to wake it up with a drop of water. There is kind of if there's chocolate in the nose, but it's kind of like dry, almost unsweetened cocoa,
Mm-hmm.
kind of a chocolate, and getting some water in starts to pop out more detail. It's grain forward. It's not really oak forward. And like I said, not confected. It's not a vanilla bomb kind of a bourbon. There's also, and it needs a little time to emerge and it happens more in the palate, but there's a very unique spiciness here. And as you swirl it, you start to get that spice playing with the chocolate component.
So, I mean, oats and brewing are very much known for contributing that kind of like rich, creamy mouthfeel. Do you think that came through in distilling? I mean, we expect a bigger, chewier bourbon just because that's kind of what we expect from New Riff. But do you think the oats kind of contributed that kind of softness and fatness?
I wouldn't say so necessarily, no. And this is, again, a big fat bourbon. I think it's much more the case that it's still down to our house style and especially our water. I don't know that it made a creamy, texturally, grains don't really contribute to texture there the way they do in beer.
Yeah.
For example, if you made a beer with 95% rye and tried to drink it, it would be like drinking frozen olive oil.
Yeah.
You know, it's slimy and funky. That doesn't come across at all. So no, it's not so much a textural addition, but the spice, they give a flavor, the oats do. And tasting it as it grew up, it dawned on me, man, the flavor of those oats is that unique spice. It's a spice complex, it's different from rye, but it kind of inhabits the same world as the rye spices do in your palate and as you're drinking the stuff. It's a unique spiciness, and that is the flavor of the oats.
I wouldn't have guessed that. And now I remember trying it thinking like it was drier than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's part of it because when we tried it, it was still called chocolate oatmeal stout bourbon. And I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting. And it had that dry graininess that you described.
Yeah, the finish
really
is
stuck with me.
Yeah, the finish is dry. But it's delicate. There's a long, how do I put it? Almost wafery, long, gentle, but dry finish, a delicate finish. That's the word I'm looking for. Despite being this big, full, fat bourbon. This is almost 4 years old. We distilled this the very end of December. I'm going to say it was December 29th or 28th, 2015. And so it turned 4 last December. And we bottled this up in late October. It was 2 years, 4 years, and almost 10 months.
Okay.
So it's older by a good 10 months than typical New Riff.
That's a significant chunk of time when it's that age.
It is, yeah, and it needed it. It was we decided by probably January of this year, well, should we release this yet? And we had these other things to release, so you don't need to jam the pipeline. You don't need to have too many things hogging the attention. And we already had maltsters and backsetters that were going to occupy our time, not to mention some more Balboa. So we kicked this down the road and kind of planned then to release it during the holidays, and later over the summer collected the name Winter Whiskey and did that whole concept. But yeah, the flavor and the savor has only benefited from another almost 10 months.
Nice. Now, to the viewers and listeners here, this is going to be pretty limited. It's going to a limited amount of Binny stores this week. So if you're looking for this, make sure you get in that store or call them up, let them know you're looking for it. So it's going to be tough to get though.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Hey, he gets a little bit there. Sorry about that. I was having all kinds of electronic. I was hoping that maybe I could have found something for us to try on this end, but no dice.
Oh.
I'll just keep drinking the Balboa Rye because it's perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Fortunately, none of that. What you need to do is since the Balboa until the next release, since the next release is out, what you really need to do is drink the single barrel rye and the bottled and bond rye, and then just hope and pray that you're around the next time the Balboa comes out.
Right. The Balboa, if you were lucky enough to get a bottle, I don't think you should leave the store without a bottle of the standard bottled and bond rye as well. Well, look, I don't think you should leave the store without one of everything of New Riff, but go and get one of the regular bottled and bond ryes, because that really isolates the Balboa grain. You're talking 2 ryes, same yeast, same water, same distillery, same still, same everything, same mash bill, same proof. They're both bottled and bond. Everything's the same, both unchill filtered, except for that Balboa. Put those side by side on a table, and you really start to see how the Balboa is so different. That's a real lesson in rye and in tasting different things in rye.
That's cool. Take it from the rye house.
100%. Indeed.
All right, cool. So I don't know what's coming up next. When are we going to get some more single barrels picks?
That's another one of those things that I can't help you with. That's not my bailiwick. You need to talk to Miss Allie. But I'm sure we got you on the calendar.
He's just the smiling face in the distillery parking lot tonight.
I'm sure we have you on the calendar for 2021.
Yeah, we've got to look. Just for folks coming in, their single barrels, of course, are upcoming. There just aren't dozens and dozens of them out there, so we take them as we're generously offered.
Yeah, we've got you down for a few, I know.
Yeah, that'll be coming, and we have we're reloaded on everything, so we stocked up for Christmas. So if anybody wants any, bottled and bond or single barrel or regular bottled and bond rye or single barrel rye, all the stores are set and ready to roll.
Yep.
Cool.
What's next, Jay? What other experiments you got in the cooker?
Well, I guess the next big thing, and I don't know exactly when it'll be out, we're letting it get a little extra old, but I alluded to it earlier, is 100% malted rye whiskey. And we've been making that since the relatively early days as well, but we wanted it to get older and be a little bit of a jewel in the crown. When that comes out, in the fullness of time, it'll take a few years because like these other things, we made it intermittently in the early years, but eventually we got to making that every month. And so again, eventually we'll get to a point where that is released frequently, several times a year. It'll always be kind of limited. We won't ever have a lot of it. We'll not have single barrels of it. Don't you ask?
I may ask.
Well, I mean,
not for a very long time could we have private barrels of it, but it'll be bottled and bond like everything else, of course. Is that 100% malted rye? And I don't know when that's coming out exactly, but that's probably the next really new major thing
That's a really cool product. You had brought some of that and shared it the last time you were in town doing a in-person event,
Right.
Which hopefully we'll get back to next year at some point.
Right.
But you shared that, and that was really cool. That's one we're definitely looking forward to.
It's really, really good whiskey. And another one that we made under I'd say the influence, but really to honor our consultant, master distiller who taught us so much and helped design so much of this building in the production plant, Larry Ebersol. And we asked him, he's not our master distiller. We don't have a master distiller at New Riff. We like it that way. But we had this consultant, this sensei, the Jedi Master Yoda. And so we call him Master, hey, Master's coming over tomorrow to taste whiskey. Be sure to be here, like that. So we asked him one day, Master, what was your favorite whiskey you ever made? And he said, it was that 100% malted rye they let me make about once a year. And so in his honor and with that information, we set about making 100% malted rye. And it's gorgeous. Again, something that someday will be part of our main portfolio along with the bourbon and ryes, but just always a little bit less. We make this much bourbon and this much rye and this much malted rye every month, but we do make it every month.
Cool.
Nice.
Cool. All right. Well, Jay, thanks a lot, man. Always a pleasure. These are really cool whiskeys. Hopefully anybody tuning in here, you can be able to get your hands on some of them. If you have any other questions about stuff like this, you can always email spiritsofbennies.com. One of the three of us will get back to you, possibly tell you that we're sold out. Sorry.
Right. Give you options.
Well, I always give you options though. Jay, thanks a lot for joining us again, man. Really appreciate it.
You bet.
Everybody else, Brett and I will be back on Monday in our second part in a series on fortified and aromatized wine, covering the wonders of cinchona and gentian and their applications in vermouth adjacent fortified wines. So that should be fun.
Yes, we were having
cool.
having a very pedantic conversation today about whether or not we should continue to call it vermouth.
Even though we are not technically featuring vermouths, but
correct.
Those are the kind of people that we have on panels on Monday. So, all right, Jay, thanks a lot, man. Everybody else, thank you. Cheers. Enjoy some rye this weekend. Weather calls for it. Thanks, Jay. We'll see you next time.
Take care, bros.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See ya.